Welcome to the press conference. First of all, I invite the host to to pose for photos first. Now, for the front row reporters, please make room for those at the back to take pictures. Thank you. Now, attending the press conference today, we have the Financial Secretary, and we also have Mr. Christopher Hui, Secretary for Financial Services and Treasury, and Ms. Alice Lau, Permanent Secretary for Financial Services and Treasury, and then also the Government Economist, Mr. Andrew Au. Now, for colleagues, for reporters who wish to ask questions, please raise your hands. First, identify the organization you represent before you speak, please. The lady in grey over there. Financial Secretary, I'm from Ming Pao. I have 3 questions. First one, on the budget on national security is $8 billion, which is 3 times the expenditure of the Hong Kong Police Force. How long is this budget for? And how come you don't make public the content, in the budget? Have you checked the budget, the estimates? If you are not allowed to vet the estimates, then would you become just the ATM machine for national security expenditure? Second question is on progressive rates for properties. Does it mean that you are encouraging, property speculation based on rates? Now, for non-residential buildings, but properties, the rate should be about 50%. Now, third question is on the electronic spending voucher. Last year you said it's too cumbersome, but how come this year you are now proposing this voucher? Are you trying to, is it a form of redemption in any way? What is the purpose of voucher? And would you limit the users? What about the elderly? If they don't know how to use the electronic voucher, would you issue them with physical vouchers? When will the vouchers be available soonest? Thank you. On the estimates involving national security spending, now when we announced the draft estimates last year, we've already announced the amount, $8 billion. This is the amount, to be spent in the next few years. Is a bit mentioned in the national security law that every year I have to submit some information to the Legislative Council. So on that occasion, we will be able to give you more details. Second question is about the rates system. In the past few years, we've been offering waivers of rates. There have been various views in the community and the council about this arrangement. But then this arrangement has been in place for some time now. We believe it is now an opportune time to examine the arrangement. Now, for the rates, both domestic and non-domestic properties, there are rates which we consider a progressive rate system. So for properties worth more, then we could charge a higher rate. And what about for owner-occupied properties, which we waive the rate or perhaps allow for a lower rates, level of rates or whatever. So we need to see what we can do to make the system more precise. Now this rating system has been in place for a long time now. From the point of view of tax revenue collection, this is a relatively straightforward system. For example, if we take a salaries tax as a case, now everyone will receive a tax. You receive a request to fill in a tax your declaration, but then for rates there's no need to do so. So for the current system, it's straightforward and the cost involved is low. But then on whether we could make it more precise, and we believe there's room for further consideration. Your other question is about the electronic spending voucher. This year, we are taking a different approach compared to the cash payout approach last year. That's for the electronic consumption vouchers. Well, because of the epidemic, we have economic downturn, and in the retail and the catering sectors, the business environment is tough. Now we've just started the vaccination program around the world. It's expected that from the next second half in the year, then we could see some resumption in economic activities. So that's why we are proposing the electronic vouchers scheme. And we believe with the electronic consumption voucher, it would be easy to put this in place. Now we have made the announcement today about the electronic consumption vouchers, and then my colleagues will be talking to operators of stored value facilities. As you know, for the electronic consumption vouchers, is a more complicated scheme compared to the cash payout scheme. Now, we've made reference to the experience in other places. I've said the amount will be $5,000, and then we have looked at the experience in other places. They don't actually give the vouchers in one go. We are initially thinking about giving $1,000 worth of voucher each month, and there will be a time limit for spending the voucher. So that's what we are considering at the moment. And we hope that we are able to start registration in the summer holidays. Sorry, the speaker is not coming through. Well, that's not directly related to property speculation. We've looked at overseas experience. Very often, for owners of properties, they have to pay tax. Now, it's a property tax in other places. It's not the same property tax we have in Hong Kong. That is, in Hong Kong, if people rent out the unit, then they'll be charged a property tax. Now, usually, there'll be reference to the property value in deciding the tax rate. And sometimes it could be a progressive tax system. Now we're just about to start the study, so we haven't yet made any decision on the arrangement. Thank you. The lady with glasses. I'm from the Hong Kong Economic Times, Financial Secretary. Now the government has increased the stock stamp duty. Hong Kong exchanges property prices value has come down by over 10%. So are you concerned that with increasing the stock stamp duty, actually you will end up losing out, and that may undermine Hong Kong's position as an international financial center? Now, some have suggested that when the economy rebounds, the government should consider going back to the previous stamp duty level. Would you consider it? So, the other question is about the electronic consumption vouchers. How can you make sure that these vouchers will benefit local shops? What about Hong Kong residents outside of Hong Kong? Can they still apply for the electronic consumption vouchers, and then could they buy online for Hong Kong products? Now, for the electronic consumption vouchers, they're meant to encourage local spending. Well, of course, we know that local shops are also offering online shopping during the epidemic. So in principle, we should be able to allow the use of the electronic consumption vouchers for online shopping. But if it's online shopping for involving overseas shops, then we will not allow it. So we will try to take this into account when we design the scheme. Now, who would be eligible? We are talking about permanent residents who have been residing in Hong Kong in the past period. And of course, that also includes the new arrivals who've come to Hong Kong. Oh, sorry, the securities stamp duty. When we talk about the development of a stock market, is the market competitive and is it vibrant? The cost of transactions, of course, is one consideration, but there are many other factors too. For our stock market, it's actually been through two phases. A few years ago, we started to have the various Connect schemes. And we have the Hong Kong Shenzhen Stock Connect and Hong Kong Shanghai Stock Connect. And then in the past few years, the economy on the mainland has been doing well. So where for international investors, they are now increasing their investment in mainland stocks in the portfolio. You could see in some of the indexes. So because of this Stock Connect scheme, so there's been an elevation of our stock market transaction volume. And then from 2018, we allow pre-profit biotechnology companies to be listed in Hong Kong. And then last year, there are some large China concept companies that have come back to Hong Kong for listing. So we have been sparing no effort in promoting the development of the securities market. So that's why our securities market remain at the forefront and it's very competitive. Now we are increasing the stamp duty from 0.1% to 0.13%. It's not a high percentage in terms of increase. And we've actually taken into account the need to maintain competitive. Well, it just so happens today that there's been some adjustment in the securities market today, but it's not just the Hong Kong market. In other stock markets in the region, we have seen some adjustments. Of course, there are always movements in the stock price movements in the stock market. We will monitor very closely how much the increase in the stock stamp duty will contribute to our coffers. I mean, we'll also see if there will be any impact. At the same time, we'll continue to work to promote the development of the market. And perhaps when the Legislative Council considers the bill, then we will listen to more views from the public and members.
This gentleman in the middle row. CNC News. Follow up on another reported question on the expense on national security at $8 billion. Can you be more specific in the course of deciding on the funding? Do you have a say in this? How do you evaluate the cost effectiveness? For example, the number of prosecutions, the more or the less as an indicator. Would it enough to last for 2 years or 8 or 10 years? In your concluding remarks, you mentioned you hope Hong Kong can use more time to address the problems. Are you someone to resolve this knot? And according to Secretary Eric Zheng, you can't love the country without loving the party. Do you love the party? To answer your question on the national security expenditure, when deciding for such expenditure, they will definitely list out their personnel required, the size establishment, and what will they do. And this budget, after submitted, the National Security Committee has scrutinized it and approved by the Chief Executive. I also took part in the deliberation as a matter of duty. I will not discuss the details here. Every year, we will submit a report to LegCo. Of this $8 billion is enough to last for a few years. On my concluding remarks, for quite some time, while drafting the budget, and after more than a year, the Hong Kong have survived a lot of difficulties. While liaising with different sectors for the budget, these are my personal reflection, and the lady in the white jacket. Stand News. A question of the national security expenditure budget of $8 billion. And the reporter just asked, how long can it last? You claimed it will last for quite a few years. For how many years is this budget going to last for? And as you should know the answer. And next year, will there be another funding request for national security? There's no mention of this $8 billion in your budget speech. Do you want to sneak it in secretly? And now that there is high unemployment, in your speech you mentioned that the government will reduce expenditure and tap into new revenues. Will you continue to donate your salary or take a pay cut just like last year? Another question on RTHK. And for the department budget estimates, the RTHK annual estimates continued to be cut at a cut-off rate of 4.6%. Do you want to whittle down RTHK? And you mentioned that while the programming hour target continue to increase, with a smaller budget, how could the RTHK produce good programming? That national security expenditure has already been paid for, in which under the NSL we have set a dedicated amount. Like I said, back in early February, when we disclosed the quarterly accounts, you can find such an item here. This is transparent. For the coming year, for 2021-2022 financial year, there's no such subvention. Therefore, we didn't touch on that in the budget speech. For the resource for RTHK, the government had mechanism in place for resource deployment. On the pay on political appointed officials, I will pass on to Ms. Alice Lau. For the civil servants' pay works on a established mechanism, generally at around Q2 every year. When we make such a decision and require extra funding, we will submit a document to the Finance Committee of LegCo. As for the CE and the principal officials, as you recall, in last April, the CE announced that the public officials already donated 1 month worth of salary, that she herself, then all the policy secretaries and then the secretary for the CE office and also political assistant will take a pay cut of 10% for 1 year. At around July last year, she further announced that according to the LegCo approval, there was supposed to be a pay increase of 2.5%. The CE announced that we're already taking a pay cut of 10%, that she will not have a pay increase. So the pay freeze and the pay cut is still in effect. She announced that back then this arrangement shall last till the June 30th this year. Next question.
I'm from Now TV. First, on the electronic consumption voucher. Why can't you give the voucher in one go? What are your considerations? And then you would only launch the scheme in summer. What are the difficulties? And you say you have to work with certain platforms. Does it mean there will be new functions or what? Second question is still on spending on national security. Now, the national security law has not stated that there must be funding in one go for several years. So how come you have set aside approved provided funds for several years in one go? Is it the case then there won't be any budget on national security for a few years? And also, it's expected that the economy may grow by 3.5 to 5.5%. Are you being too optimistic? Have you set aside, say, money for possible relief measures again? And do you love the party? This was a question asked earlier. On electronic consumption vouchers, we've looked at the experience overseas. Now, if we do it by installments, and then we limit, you will have a time limit for spending each installment. That's the best, that would achieve the best result as seen from overseas experience. And then you ask why it will have to be the summer. Because after we've announced the scheme, our colleagues will have to talk to operators of stored value facilities, and then we may have to offer more options, so we may have to approach more than one operator, and then that takes time for us to make the preparation. Last year, for the cash payout scheme, we could only launch it in June, July, after the announcement was made in the budget. So that's why we expect that for the voucher scheme, it could only be launched in summer. Now, for the national security expenditure, it's been payments been made last year in December. It's been reflected in the last budget. But for this latest budget, there is no need for us to make further provisions. Last question on economic growth. We hope that from the second half of the year, we'll be able to see more vibrancy in the economy, because for the first half of the year, the epidemic is still here, and even in many places, the pandemic remains severe. So there will be less domestic external demand and domestic demand, and international travel is also restricted. That's why we believe the economy will not recover so much in the first half of the year. But then as the pandemic is under control with vaccination, especially extensive vaccination in other places as well, then hopefully starting from the second half of the year, we will see more growth or more recovery in the economy. And that's why we believe the economic growth may be better next in the second half. But then at the same time, of course, we know Hong Kong is a small economy that's externally oriented. We are very much subject to external factors. Now, apart from the pandemic, we've seen there are other factors that may affect our economic growth, such as the China-U.S. relations or geopolitical situations and so on. So there remains, variables, and the situation is rather complex, and that's why we believe growth of 3.5 to 5.5% is possible. We are confident with that, and we've actually looked at the projections of economies around the world. In most cases, the range is between 4 and 5%. Perhaps the government economists may have something to say. Yes, the Financial Secretary has already explained that clearly. Now, we have seen projections made by in the private sector, the range is mostly between 3.5 and 5.5%. Of course, there are still uncertainties, but then we believe there is a good chance that there will be a positive economic growth rate this year. At the far end, second row, the one in white. Yeah, so this year there's no cash payout, there's no unemployment assistance. So what do you expect the public reaction to be to this budget? I'm from In Media. For the 2020 to 21 financial year ending this March, our fiscal deficit would be some $250 billion. It's more than what we have projected when we announced the deficit in the budget last year. Well, that's because of the pandemic. And then we've also several rounds of relief measures and anti-epidemic measures. That's why this year we have a huge fiscal deficit. For 2021 to 22, the consolidated fiscal deficit is projected to be $101.6 billion. So it's still over $100 billion. And that already takes into account the issuance of some $30 billion of green bonds. And then we're also bringing back an investment return from other funds. And then we're bringing back $23 billion from the housing reserve and so on. So actually, if you discount all these other sums, and our deficit could be as high as $180 billion. It's not a small sum at all. So with tax concessions and other support measures, maybe they are not up to your expectation. But then last year already we had a large deficit, and this year the deficit is still quite large. And then there are so many uncertainties in the external environment. Of course, we fully appreciate the pressure the public are under. That's why we try to offer relief as far as possible within our means. At the same time, we have to consider the possibilities of other needs. And there also may be some fluctuations in the financial market, and that could lead to risks. So we need to have enough reserves so we're able to face any difficulties if they arise. And so then we will still have the means to offer help to the community. So I hope the public will understand this. We have already tried our very best here. The lady at the back in long hair.
Natalie from South China Morning Post. The first question is...
I'm sorry, I don't quite hear you. You are from South China Morning Post, right?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Hope you may clarify to us on the unanswered questions regarding the national security funding. You said that it could be spent on personnel, and could you clarify, do you mean the Office for Safeguarding the National Security or for the police? And can you say the exact number of years the fund involved? The second question is on the consumption vouchers. What is the government's plan for the elderly or anyone who does not use smartphone or any form of digital payment? And can service sectors like beauty parlors, dream rooms accept the vouchers? And also, how do the government address the security concerns of online payment platforms? And the third question is, because in the budget, you will offer the unemployed low-interest loans, but can the government explain the logic why there are no emergency funds for them, despite repeated demands from different groups? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I hope I do fully understand the question because I have some problem in hearing, but I try my best. On national security expenditure, the first question, right? We have set aside 8 billion Hong Kong dollar for that purpose. That amount is for multiple years. It was it was incurred in December last year and published in the quarterly account of the government at the beginning of February. In the coming financial year, year 21-22, we have not provided for any additional provisions. The expenditure is not just for the police. For national security purposes, there are other government departments involved. So it is a fund, a special fund, according to the national security legislation to set aside for that purposes. As to the consumption voucher, we hope the scope could be as wide as possible, so long as it is to be incurred in domestic consumption. For online purchases, if it is for online purchases from local merchants, it is okay. We are not going to allow those consumption voucher to be spent on overseas purchases. On unemployment, on your question about the government guarantee personal loan, well, we acknowledge that under this prolonged economic recession, many members of the public have been suffering dearly, suffering badly, and some of them might want to have more options in order to tide themselves over. So the personal loan is meant for that purposes, an option available to those unemployed to consider. The amount to be borrowed from the bank is 6 times of his salaries, up to a maximum of $80,000. This is an option for them to consider, and it is also available to those freelancers who can prove they have lost their income for a consecutive period.
係，下一題。Festival 呢位男士，唔該。
司長你。
HKL1. As for the electronic consumption vouchers, has the government considered there are a lot of small shops or online shops that cannot accept electronic payments? If they need to provide such equipment, would the government support them? A second question on the unemployment assistance did not come through on the budget. You are providing this special 100 loan guarantee for individual scheme. Well, you worry that you're not able to cope with a prolonged need for turning down unemployment assistance. And a lot of people are unemployed due to the anti-epidemic measures, for example, restaurants and bars closures. Are you worried that they may feel that's insincere? And when the employment support scheme expired, you promised more targeted support. In your budget, I see there are rent waivers and waivers on business registration and low-interest loans. This target assistance for various industries. And last year, you invited experts to tap into the Futures Fund. And this year, you claimed that you accepted the view and for bringing back $202 billion. Are you investing on infrastructure to add the liquidity? It seems that the Hong Kong growth portfolio seems more on infrastructure. And when Caroline ran for CE election, she promised to look into the 001 savings measure. And now that you're freezing the establishment, are you worried on the civil service morale? Or you hope that you hope to demonstrate your governance? For next year's CE election, will you be running? Is this budget a good piece of homework for you? On the consumption voucher, after announcement, my colleagues will discuss with the stored value facilities providers. We will probably appoint more than one to give the public more choices. Once we can finalize it, we will announce the details as soon as possible so that the merchants can install such equipment as soon as possible. And whether the government can help with the cost of installing such equipment, that's something we can look into. On unemployment assistance in the short-term assistance, the government repeatedly state its reasons. We had nothing to add. On the special 100% loan guarantee for individual scheme, we notice that after a prolonged period of recession with high unemployment, some members of the public may enter financial difficulties. Therefore, we will provide an option for them just in case they were required to. We are learning from the small and medium business lending scheme. As it is fully guaranteed by the government, the approval process will be quite straightforward. Of course, we will try our best to minimize abuse. And under the mortgage securities company, mortgage corporation companies, they will be quite efficient as they're quite familiar with this kind of loan guarantee products. We're preventing such an option for the public consideration. It's up to them whether to use them or not. That is something that we can do. So whether our measures are targeted. On one hand, I hope you can understand, we have over 300,000 small and medium enterprises in Hong Kong, making up at around 99% of our companies. When helping out the SMEs, it may give the impression that it's almost universal. As for the tax rebate or rent rebate, since it's such a vast coverage. As for individual industries, as for the water and sewage charge waiver, we're waiving them for 8 months. That will benefit the catering establishments and so on. When considering the relief measures, we need to consider our fiscal capability, and also we need to have a combination measures. Some will be more wide encompassing, benefiting more SMEs. Some will be more targeting towards certain industries. So these are the considerations we have. For the Futures Fund, we're bringing back the proceeds. When we inject into the Futures Fund, we said that the investment will be locked up for 10 years, and then the proceeds and the interest will be brought back together. And throughout, the investment returns have not been reflected in our accounts. With this time, we decided to reflect the investment return onto our books. In last year's budget, the Hong Kong growth portfolio is still going underway. The HKMA is taken forward. We shall work with the expert fund managers, and currently they are conducting a selection exercise. As for enhancing our efficiency and reducing expenditure inside the government, I'll pass on to Ms. Alice Lau to explain. As for the expenditure reduction, as mentioned in his speech, the FS stated that our target is that by the next financial year, 2022 and 23 financial year, that without affecting people's livelihood, the department's recurrent expenditure can be saved by 1%. The secretary may feel that public want to know how to decide the target at 1% and why such a small extent. First, for public expenditure, first option will explain to the press in our recurrent expenditure over 60%, and by this year, for example, 58% are spent on a few major policy areas, including social welfare, education, and healthcare. In deciding the saving target of 1%, the top consideration is we should not affect the expenditure in these three policy areas. while achieving savings, we can only start from ourselves. Without cutting expenditure to the outside, we shall do some belt tightening on our side. As a department or the policy bureau level, in our current expenditure, over 60% is spent on personal emoluments. The Secretary just explained that we announced there will be zero expansion in civil service establishment. Without adding more staff, the remaining room will be the daily recurrent expenditure. For example, the office expenses, or as contracting out some preparation work, or streamlining work processes to enhance our efficiency to achieve savings. With multiple constraints, this 1% saving target we see as challenging, but also determined to achieve. So these are the considerations in setting this target, and also using this opportunity to providing assurances that by having the same program, it will not affect public services and public expenditure. Well, this is also the top consideration when it's time to roll out the reduction program.
On your last question, for the government team, our first and foremost priority is to fight the epidemic, and then we have to plan for the economic recovery as the next step, and that's our consideration really in the consultation process for the budget. That is, we want to find out which sectors are suffering, and we want to know what public expectations are for the budget and how much we could of those expectations we could meet. That's all. Over there at the back, that lady.
English questions from TMHK English News. First question on the spending voucher. Can the Secretary tell us what are authorities planning to do for the elderly people or people who don't have smartphone, as like a question that was put forward by another reporter just now? And why not just dole out cash directly? When kind of coming up with a new system to dole out these spending vouchers could cause a lot of administrative costs as well. Second question regarding the unemployment loan. Would this measure kind of be putting the unemployed people into debt in essence? Because, well, we're giving them an option to get loans. And third question about the forecast for economic growth. With the pandemic kind of still raging on around the world and in Hong Kong, is that forecast a bit too optimistic? Even though you're expecting, growth to come back in the second half, the pandemic is still kind of continuing in Hong Kong as of now. Thank you.
Thank you. On the consumption voucher, we are conscious of the need of the elderly. Taking the cash payout scheme as an example, for those elderly individuals, they can have their relatives or their helpers to help them to apply for the loan. On the consumption voucher, it seems to me a lot of people are quite familiar of using Octopus, which is the most common store value facilities in Hong Kong. So if we could use Octopus as one of the means to effect this consumption voucher, I think it would also be acceptable to our elderly members of the public. We are working on it. Definitely, Octopus is one of our obvious choice. On the unemployment loan, we are not encouraging people to borrow. We just reckon that in the community, during this prolonged period of economic recession, with a high unemployment rate, there are members of public who might have financial difficulty and may need to have some money to tide them over. So we offer this as an option for them to consider. That's why when you look at the details of the scheme, it is not a huge amount. It is to be based on the earnings of the individuals in the past period, taking 6 times of their average monthly earning as the ceiling, subject to a cap of $80,000. The interest rate is just 1%, and upon complete repayment of the loan, this interest would be fully refunded to them. So the idea is to allow them to have, if they want to use, to have this option available to borrow a small amount. During the initial 12 months, they need only to pay interest. They would need to repay the interest together with the principal from the 13 months over a period of a maximum of 5 years. So with these terms, I think our intention is to offer an option for those in need. And we hope this could be of some use to them. On the pandemic, on the economic forecast, if I remember correctly, the IMF estimate for the global economic growth for 2021 is about 5.5%. And we are part of China. The mainland will be registering a very strong economic growth. In Europe and US, if the pandemic is under control, when the vaccination program is widely adopted by the citizen, it seems to be quite possible that in the overseas economies, the economic revival, economic recovery will be quite strong as from the middle of this year. So given these circumstances, we think it would not be unreasonable to give an economic growth estimate of between 3.5% to 5.5%. Although there are uncertainties. The pandemic situation is one, the Sino-US tension is another. Geographic tension are also something we have to watch out, not to mention also the volatility of the financial market because of the quantity easing in European and US over the past 2 years. So we have to be very careful. We have to watch out for risks. But on the other hand, we should not be overly pessimistic. Thank you.
最後排嗰位男士。
The gentleman at the back, please. Good afternoon. I'm from the Oriental Daily. 3 questions. First, we see there will be a deficit for a number of years. How are you going to generate more revenue and make savings? And how can you prevent Hong Kong from any financial shocks? What about the Lend Out Tomorrow scheme? Would it be changed in any way? Second question is on the electronic consumption vouchers. Would you limit use to certain types of goods, for example, electrical goods, clothing, or whatever? What about using the vouchers to buy services? So how can you make sure that the scheme is fair, there won't be any collusion between the government and businesses? The third question is on the progressive rating system. You say that the review has nothing to do with controlling or containing property speculation, but then you may bring in this concept of owner-occupied premises. So if you do that, does it mean that there's room to relax the macro-prudential measures for the property market?
We do have a very we see our reserves as dwindling, and also a stock fiscal picture. On one hand, we have to cut expenses and tap into new revenue sources. On expense reduction, we will be extra careful when adding recurring expenditure, and inside the government, we will conduct an expenditure reduction program. For this financial year, 2022-21, there will be zero growth in civil service establishment. In 2022-23, we'll need to save 1%, as explained by Ms. Lau just now. For new revenue source, this year we have raised the stamp duty on stock transfer, on salary checks and profit checks. We examined them carefully. And in view of the past year or so, the economy was doing poorly. A lot of people suffered a drop in income. The SME are struggling. And some of the sectors might have done well, for example, financial related. However, a lot of them have been doing poorly. In this case, this year may not be the right time to adjust the salary tax and the profit tax rates. And so whether we need to do so in the future, we won't rule it out, and we'll keep this closely in view. Besides raising the stamp duty on stock transfer for more revenue, and under the OECD, they are promoting a global minimum tax. On one hand, they're trying to roll out digital tax and also the global minimum tax. For the global minimum tax, our initial judgment is that while implementing this, that it will bring more revenue to us. Currently, we are taxing according to domicile, and some of the multinationals, if they have a headquarters in Hong Kong, and currently, if the tax rate is below the global minimum tax rate, they will need to pay tax to us. The OECD have yet to come to a final decision, and they will decide on the timetable within this year. Once we get a clear direction, we can look into how we can implement this, which will have some positive impact to our tax revenue. In the current environment, we shall concentrate on effort on fighting the economy and help the economy to go back on track, while internally we shall undertake some studies on this, and we need to adjust the tax revenue. We shall have an informed debate with the public in order to seek a consensus or even identify the mainstream opinion, which we see as the right way forward. For Lantau tomorrow, funding was approved for the feasibility study. Besides the technical study, they will also look into the financial feasibility. The government internal assessment is that to take Lantau tomorrow forward, it will cost money, and yet this project will also bring in land revenue and other proceeds and also cash flows. Our assessment is that this project itself not only resolve the housing shortage and also the transport connection between Hong Kong Island and the NT West, will also bring in revenue for us as well. Within the next 2 to 3 years, we don't need to spend too much effort to it, as this year, this study will take around 40 months. So we will keep an eye on how it would unfold. For the consumption vouchers, the purpose of these vouchers help to spur domestic consumption and help the Hong Kong economy to regain momentum. Therefore, we must require the spending to take place in Hong Kong. For the restrictions, we probably won't impose too much restriction at this stage. Whether it should limit it to goods only, service industry has been affected over the past few months. Therefore, we may consider including service industries. And therefore, this is the direction we can consider, as so long that the vouchers are spent locally. And this is the top consideration. As for the review on the rates system, this has nothing to do with the property market management measures. As I explained already, or maybe I pass on to the Ms. Eslau to explain to you. The rating system, just like the FS said, the last major changes took place at around 1995, which was some 25 years away. As you might recall, we call it rates. And it used to pay for municipal expenditures. And when the two municipal councils were abolished, the relevant expenditure have returned under the government general accounts. Our rating system had yet to be changed. They don't make up a huge part of our revenue at around 3%. This is a very wide-based revenue, and because of this, you may notice for many years in our budget, and any kind of one-off relief measures, they could be rolled out through to offer a public relief, and due to its wide-based nature. And also because of this, when we roll off relief measures where the rates relief are involved, the public may take a different view, that some may see that this approach may not benefit some members of the public, but more beneficial to the rich. And led to us to do a review. And now that our rating system are using a standard rate, that do not break down into categories or do not differentiate between a rental value and the actual worth. And looking at overseas experience, we see that residential property, they have a progressive sliding scale based on their worth and value. If we take this approach, we should also consider that whether we should offer exemption for owner-occupied properties. So these are the directions I'll mention in the budget speech. Especially, I would like to highlight that the progressive rent rates, that just like the tax band scale, would also show that those who can afford can pay more. If they have a property with high rentable value that is not used for owner occupation, that may be under our tax regime, they do afford to pay a bit more. So that's one of the main factors in considering a progressive rating system. And also, while offering our relief measures, that it has been discussed under some circumstances that the rates were paid by the owner, and sometimes based on a tenancy agreement, it is actually paid by the tenants. While offering such relief, who stand to benefit, that is something uncertain. In the cost of review, we can consider that whether the primary liability for rates payment should be granted to the property owners. If we decide to offering any relief, it will be clear that who will stand to benefit. So, well, these are something that we can review or explore while reviewing the whole rating system. At this stage, this discussion are far from mature. While taking forward, there will be new directions or other kind of tweakings. At this stage, we couldn't say for certain that upon the review there must be changes, or we must follow the directions as stated. We need to consider the impact of the general public and also the affordability of the rates payers. It was said that the rates is a very wide-based tax revenue. Last two questions.
The gentleman in white over here, please. I'm from cable TV. First, on electronic consumption voucher. Just now, the Financial Secretary mentioned the purpose of the voucher scheme is not the same as that for the cash payout scheme. Last year, I remember you said that you paid cash, you wanted people to spend it, and now you are offering the vouchers. Also, the purpose is to encourage people to spend. So why is the purpose different? So are you just going back on your words, going back on what you've done in the past? And the second question is about an employment loan. Now, the jobless are not able to find work, they have no income, and they have to worry that they need to repay the loan in future. Actually, wouldn't know whether they would be able to repay the loan. Now you have come up with this loan scheme. Are you just adding more pressure on them? So you're just trying to do something to show that you're helping the unemployed, but actually not helping them. And in response to an earlier question, you just about the RTHK, you only gave a one-line reply. Now, 40% of the budget of the RTHK is on production of news programs and other programs. So, are you trying to deduct the provisions for RTHK? Do you expect the RTHK to have to suspend the production of certain programs, like current affairs programs and so on? And then there will be a fiscal deficit in the next few years, and then in 2025 to 26, it's possible that there may be a surplus. Are you being too optimistic? Have you not taken into account possible relief measures in the future? On the electronic consumption voucher. Now, last year when we introduced the cash payout scheme, I remember you did ask whether we could have a consumption voucher if we wanted to encourage spending. So last year, when we launched the cash payout scheme, we tried to make it simple so we could introduce it as soon as possible. That's why from the time of announcement to the actual start of the registration, it took just a few months, and we started paying out cash in July. Now, this year, we've seen a prolonged economic recession. Many sectors are really suffering. So the government needs to do a bit more to help boost spending. That's why we are offering the electronic consumption vouchers. And from past experience, we could see that now for the stored value facilities in Hong Kong, there's been advancement due to technological advancement, so we could make use of such facilities. Then we could limit spending locally as people use the vouchers. So that's why we are now offering the vouchers. On the 100% guarantee personal loans, now we're just offering another option to those in need. If they think this loan would help them, of course we are happy to provide guarantee so they could have this emergency cash for use, but then it's really up to individuals to decide whether to take out the loan. Now, on our fiscal deficit, I've already given a detailed explanation, so I won't go into detail again. But perhaps I could say this briefly. Why is it that in our medium-term forecast, we have not included relief measures such as tax refund or concession and so on? Because we've always said these are one-off relief measures. So these measures will only be included in a year when they are introduced. And so in other years, these measures will only be provided for if they are to be introduced. That's the reason for this arrangement. And then in future, we're going to bring back money from the housing reserve, the future fund, and so on. So we would have some respite. Now, what we need to achieve is economic growth, so then we will have jobs and so on. If in other years we want to generate more revenue, what are the options? Now that's mention of the best case, and then whether there will be adjustment of the salaries tax, property tax, and so on. Well, we've received plenty of views from the community on such matters, but then we need to be certain about our financial status. And then we need to know what we need to do. That is, we need to generate revenue and make savings. And then we have to consider what we can do to achieve that. And we need to talk to the community about it. So that's the strategy we're adopting. Now, we've been in economic recession for 2 years in a row. This year there may be recovery, but the rate of recovery may not be that quick. So we have to consider what the company could afford as a whole. On the estimates for the RTHK, we have an internal resources allocation system, and that's what we go by. Now, you asked about the details. I'm afraid I don't have the information at hand, but I could say this in response to your question. We did go by the resources allocation mechanism, and we consider the needs of all departments equally. Thank you. Last question. The gentleman at the back. I'm from Wenwei Pao. 2 questions. One, under the epidemic, many in the middle class are suffering hardships. But then the tax concession has dropped from $20,000 last year to $10,000 this year. So are you not, are you turning a blind eye to the plight of those in the middle class? And second question, some have criticized that you're not saying enough about Hong Kong's participation in the Greater Bay Area development. So what is your response? Do you think you have said enough? The tax concessions refund is 100%, but the ceiling is $10,000, so it's less than that for last year. I hope you could see why, because last year we had, well, for 2020-21, we have a huge fiscal deficit of over $200 billion. This year, we still have a huge fiscal deficit of over $100 billion, of over $10 billion rather. So we try to, take care of the needs of all sectors as far as possible. For the middle class, there will be less of a tax concession. I'm afraid there's nothing more we can do. We have to consider what resources we have. But still, we're trying to do our best. For the Greater Bay Area development, of course, it is a very important driver for Hong Kong's development. In the budget, there is a paragraph under the heading Greater Bay Area. Maybe it's not a long paragraph, but then before that paragraph, we talk about Hong Kong's future development, our positioning, where we have the edge, which sectors have the edge, and what our positioning is. There's a clear explanation in the budget. Now we are part of the Greater Bay Area. Our population is 7 million, but for the population of the GBA is over 70 million, so it's a much larger market. And then we talk about the various Stock Connect and Bond Connect schemes. What about wealth management Connect scheme? Definitely is about Hong Kong and the Greater Bay Area. And apart from financial services, in innovation and technology, we have our advantages. Our universities have strong research capacities. We have good, robust intellectual property protection. In Hong Kong is where the West meets the East, so we're able to bring in talents. So we do have our competitive edges. But then at the same time, in INT, many of the leading companies are in Shenzhen, and for the production base is mostly in Dongguan, Huizhou, and so on. So we need to work together with all these places, and then we could complement each other in terms of our strengths. And then for this whole production chain, and we are able to cover the entire chain. We can use the smartphone as an example. The design and the IP are the parts that make the most profit. It's not so much about the production itself. So that's how we explain that. And then say on aviation or air cargo. Now we managed to handle 4.5 million tons of goods last year. Now we have the free runway system. We are working on high value added logistics centers, and then we are building facilities on temperature controlled value added goods and so on. And we don't have any custom duty. So our it's important that we maintain our position as an aviation hub, especially in relation to air cargo now. So if you talk about the Greater Bay Area, Hong Kong ranks first as an aviation hub, so we need to maintain this edge. These are some of the examples that I've just mentioned. So when we talk about the Greater Bay Area and its coverage in the budget, we should look beyond the paragraph. There are other parts of the budget that are relevant. And then we're talking about the 14th five-year plan and the very complex international scene. So on the mainland, they are talking about dual circulation, and the Greater Bay Area is where there's the entry point for Hong Kong to be involved in the dual circulation development. So we could help local manufacturers to go into the mainland market. The Trade Development Council could help businesses to go into the GBA market. And we are the most cosmopolitan city in the country. You can consider our rule of law, our connection with the other parts of the world, and so on. Hong Kong has a unique role, and this will remain our advantage. So when we talk about the GBA, of course, we need to seize upon the opportunities presented. Sorry, speaker's not coming through. Consumption voucher and the administrative cost, well, it's too early to say how much it will be, because first we need to approach the relevant stored value facilities operators. But I could give you some, information. Last year for the cash payout, the administrative cost was projected to be $1 billion. We've spent so far $360 million. That's for cash payout for 7 million people. So we will try to save as far as we can. But now we have to consider what store value facilities operators are going to use. And then we have to design the scheme. We have to make sure there is proper protection of personal data and so on. So my colleagues will address all these issues. Thank you. Sorry, speaker's not coming through. The speaker's not using microphone.
國家安全
The national security expenditure, we set aside $8 billion to last for a few years. But it was spent in a lot of areas, and these are usually confidential information in terms of the work of national security. I shall work according to the NSL requirements, and there will be a document about to let you go. Thank you for coming. That's the end of the briefing.
下星期去打。
你攞改動。